December 18th, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. Snow lay heavy on the Ardennes. The forests were dark, dense, and silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Temperatures hovered well below freezing. Roads were coated in ice, narrow and winding, bordered by pine trees that blocked both visibility and sunlight. In this isolated corner of Belgium, a small market town named Bastogne sat at the center of something far larger than itself. 7 major roads converged here. In winter, those roads mattered more than any town square or church tower. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled movement through the southern Ardennes. On the morning of December 18th, American commanders were still struggling to understand the scale of what had begun 2 days earlier. On December 16th, 1944, Adolf Hitler had launched Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes counteroffensive. Its objective was simple in theory and catastrophic in consequence: break through the thinly held American lines, cross the Meuse River, seize Antwerp, and split the Allied armies in half. The attack came through terrain the Allies believed unsuitable for a major winter offensive. That belief had been wrong. By the time Bastogne entered the equation, German armored columns were already punching deep into Allied territory. Entire American divisions were falling back in confusion. Communications were unreliable. Snow grounded Allied aircraft, removing air reconnaissance and close air support. German units moved under the cover of forest and weather, appearing where they were not expected, cutting roads and isolating towns. Into this situation came the 101st Airborne Division, an elite formation trained for parachute assault, not winter ground defense. They arrived by truck, not parachute, rushed forward with little preparation, incomplete equipment, and limited artillery. They were about to become the center of the German offensive in the south. The order reached the 101st Airborne late on December 18th. They were resting and refitting in Mourmelon-le-Grand, France, after the brutal fighting of Operation Market Garden. Many men were still recovering. Winter clothing was in short supply. Some units lacked full ammunition loads. Despite this, trucks were loaded and engines started almost immediately. The division was commanded by Major General Maxwell D. Taylor, but Taylor was in the United States at the time. In his absence, command fell to Brigadier General Anthony C. McAuliffe, the division artillery commander, a calm, methodical officer known more for competence than drama. The convoy drove through the night, headlights blacked out, roads clogged with retreating units, refugees, and broken vehicles. Snow fell steadily. Men slept sitting upright, rifles across their laps. They arrived in Bastogne on December 19th. What they found was a town already under pressure. Elements of the 10th Armored Division had reached Bastogne earlier and were fighting delaying actions against advancing German forces. These armored units were outnumbered and scattered, but they had bought time, just enough. McAuliffe immediately began deploying his regiments. 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment moved east and southeast. 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment took positions to the north. 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment went south and southwest. 327th Glider Infantry Regiment filled the western approaches. Artillery units were positioned around the town, their guns dug into frozen ground with pickaxes and bare hands. Foxholes were shallow, often no more than scrapes in the earth before men struck solid ice. There was no continuous front line. The perimeter was wide, roughly 15 miles, and thinly held. Each regiment covered several miles of forest and road junctions. Communication between units relied on field telephones and runners, both vulnerable to shell fire and snow. By the end of December 20th, German forces had nearly closed the ring. Opposing the Americans were elements of General Hasso von Manteuffel's Fifth Panzer Army. The units pressing toward Bastogne included Panzer Lehr Division, one of Germany's best-equipped armored formations, 2nd Panzer Division, 26th Volksgrenadier Division, 5th Fallschirmjäger Division. Altogether, approximately 45,000 German troops with tanks, assault guns, and heavy artillery were converging on a perimeter held by roughly 18,000 American defenders, many of whom had been in combat continuously since Normandy. German commanders understood Bastogne's importance. Without it, their southern armored thrust would be forced onto secondary roads, slowing the advance and burning fuel they did not have. Time was already slipping away. The Meuse River remained distant. On December 21st, German units completed the encirclement. Bastogne was cut off. All roads in and out of the town were under German fire. Telephone lines to higher headquarters went dead. Ammunition stocks were finite. Medical supplies were critically low. Field hospitals overflowed. Wounded men lying on floors and stairwells in unheated buildings. Snow continued to fall. The sky remained sealed shut, denying Allied aircraft access to the battlefield. The 101st Airborne was alone. The cold was relentless. Night temperatures dropped well below freezing. Many paratroopers still wore standard uniforms without winter overcoats. Frostbite began appearing alongside combat wounds. To sleep was dangerous. Men had to be shaken awake to ensure they had not frozen. Food was limited to K-rations and emergency supplies. Hot meals were rare. Water froze in canteens. Weapons malfunctioned as lubricants thickened in the cold. German artillery began probing the perimeter, firing ranging shots to identify American gun positions. Once located, the shelling intensified. Tree bursts, artillery shells exploding in the branches above, sent shards of wood downward like shrapnel, causing gruesome wounds. Despite the pressure, McAuliffe maintained discipline. Orders were clear. Hold the perimeter at all costs. There would be no breakout attempt. Bastogne was not to be abandoned. On December 22nd, the Germans made a move not with artillery or armor, but with words. That morning, under a white flag, a German delegation approached American lines near the village of Hemrolen. They carried a formal written demand for surrender, addressed to the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne. The letter stated that German forces had surrounded Bastogne and that further resistance would lead to the complete annihilation of the USA troops. It offered the Americans 2 hours to surrender honorably. The demand was delivered to division headquarters in Bastogne. McAuliffe read it once, then again. According to those present, his first reaction was not anger, but disbelief. Nuts, he said. The staff paused. They were unsure whether he was joking, but that single word captured exactly what McAuliffe felt. The demand was absurd. The division would not surrender. A formal reply was drafted. When the German officers received the response, they were confused. An American liaison officer had to explain. Nuts, he said, means go to hell. The Germans withdrew. The fighting resumed. On the morning of December 23rd, the weather changed. Cloud cover broke. The gray ceiling lifted. For the first time in days, the sky above Bastogne cleared. Almost immediately, the sound of engines filled the air. Allied aircraft, C-47 Skytrains, appeared overhead in long formations. They flew low, straight, and slow, vulnerable to ground fire. From their open doors, bundles of supplies tumbled downward, parachutes blossoming white against the snow. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, artillery shells. Not all of it landed inside American lines. Some drifted into German positions, but enough fell where it was needed to change the situation. Soon after, P-47 Thunderbolts arrived. They attacked German gun positions, vehicles, and troop concentrations, strafing roads and dropping bombs. For the first time since the encirclement, the Americans had air support. Morale surged. Men who had been holding on through exhaustion and cold now believed, truly believed, that relief would come. But the Germans were not finished. German commanders, frustrated by delay, ordered direct assaults on the perimeter. Infantry, supported by armor, pressed against the American lines, particularly in the north and east. At villages like Noville, Foy, and Marvy, the fighting was brutal and close. Snow-covered fields offered little concealment. Tanks advanced along narrow roads, funneling into choke points where American bazooka teams waited. The Panzer IV and Panther tanks were formidable machines, armed with high-velocity guns capable of destroying American Shermans at long range. But in the forests and villages around Bastogne, terrain limited their advantage. Infantry had to lead, and infantry suffered. American artillery, despite limited ammunition, was deadly accurate. Forward observers, often operating from church towers or frozen foxholes, called down fire within yards of their own positions. One gun crew fired until their hands bled from the cold metal. Still, the perimeter bent, but did not break. By December 25th, Christmas Day, the situation remained critical. Casualties mounted. Medical evacuation was impossible. Surgeons operated non-stop, using ether sparingly, amputating when they had to. That afternoon, German forces launched a major attack toward the village of Marvy, supported by armor. The fighting raged into the night. Several American positions were overrun and retaken. The line held, somewhere beyond the southern horizon. Relief was moving. The snow still covered the fields, but the sound of artillery now came from more than one direction. At dawn on December 26th, American forward observers inside Bastogne reported something new. Distant gunfire rolling in from the south, rhythmic and heavy. It was not German fire. The pattern was different. The cadence belonged to American artillery. General George S. Patton's Third Army had turned north. Only days earlier, Patton had been driving east toward the Saar when the German offensive erupted. Within 48 hours, he had reversed the axis of an entire army. 3 corps pivoting 90 degrees in winter conditions few believed passable. It was an operation without precedent in speed or scale. The spearhead belonged to Major General Hugh Gaffey's 4th Armored Division, advancing along icy roads through villages whose names meant nothing to the men fighting for them. Every mile was contested. German rearguards, anti-tank guns, and blown bridges slowed the column, but the momentum continued. By mid-morning, tanks of Combat Command R reached the outskirts of Assenois, less than 2 miles from Bastogne's southern perimeter. The village lay astride the main road into town, defended by German infantry supported by anti-tank guns dug into snow-covered hedgerows. American tanks advanced carefully, firing point-blank into houses used as strongpoints. Infantry followed behind, clearing rooms with grenades and rifle fire. Casualties mounted, but the pressure never eased. Shortly after 4 p.m., a Sherman tank from Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Boggess, pushed through the final German roadblock. The tank rolled forward, its tracks crunching over ice and debris, and crossed into the American perimeter. Men from the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion emerged from foxholes, waving and shouting. Some laughed, others simply leaned against the tank, too exhausted to speak. The siege of Bastogne was broken. The relief did not mean safety. The corridor Patton's forces had opened was narrow, less than 1,000 yards wide in places, and under constant German fire. Supply trucks moved forward at night, headlights off, navigating wrecked vehicles and frozen ruts. German artillery shelled the road relentlessly. Ambulances made return trips carrying wounded men who had been trapped for more than a week. Many were beyond help. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne did not rest. Orders were clear. Hold the perimeter and prepare to go on the offensive. The German command had failed to take the town, but they were not withdrawing. Instead, they attempted to cut the corridor and resume the encirclement. Attacks intensified against the southern approach, while pressure continued in the north around Foy. The battle entered a new phase. The days following the relief were among the hardest. The myth of rescue faded quickly. Bastogne was still under fire. The town was shattered. Buildings burned, streets cratered, churches reduced to rubble. Temperatures dropped again. Snowstorms returned intermittently, grounding aircraft and limiting visibility. Artillery remained the dominant force on both sides. The Germans committed fresh units, including elements of the 9th Panzer Division, attempting to regain momentum. But the offensive had lost its cohesion. Fuel shortages plagued German armor. Replacements were poorly trained. Coordination between infantry and tanks faltered. American forces, by contrast, now had supply lines, fragile but functional. Artillery ammunition increased. Medical evacuation resumed. Units rotated where possible. On December 30th, McAuliffe received word that General Maxwell Taylor was returning. Command of the division would soon pass back to him, but the tone had already been set. The division had not surrendered. It had not broken. On January 3rd, Allied commanders ordered a coordinated counteroffensive to eliminate the bulge entirely. From the north, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's forces pushed south. From the south, Patton's Third Army advanced northward. Bastogne became a launching point. The 101st Airborne attacked toward Foy, a small village north of town that had resisted repeated efforts to retake it. The ground was open, snow-covered, and exposed. German machine guns and mortars covered every approach. The assault began in heavy fog. Paratroopers advanced in short rushes, dropping into shell holes and ditches. Casualties were immediate and severe. Officers fell. Non-commissioned officers took over. After hours of fighting, American infantry entered Foy. House-to-house combat followed, ending only when the last German defenders withdrew or were killed. By mid-January, the bulge was collapsing. German forces fell back toward their starting positions. The Ardennes offensive had failed. The defense of Bastogne had cost the 101st Airborne thousands of casualties, killed, wounded, and frostbitten. German losses were heavier still, including irreplaceable armored vehicles and experienced troops. Strategically, the stand at Bastogne denied the Germans the road network they needed to sustain their advance. Operationally, it bought time the Allies used to regroup, counterattack, and ultimately destroy the offensive. The war would continue for 4 more months. Bastogne did not end it, but it marked the last moment when Germany had any chance, however slim, to alter its course. The town would be rebuilt, the forests would grow back, but the ground around Bastogne would forever bear the memory of men who held in freezing darkness, surrounded, cut off, and ordered not to retreat. They did not. Bastogne stands not as a legend of invincibility, but as a record of endurance, of ordinary men enduring cold, fear, exhaustion, and isolation under conditions that allowed no retreat. Their stand did not rely on luck or rhetoric, but on discipline, leadership, and the refusal to yield ground that could not be yielded. Today, the fields are quiet, the roads are open, but the cost of holding them remains written in history. They are remembered,